In the headlines, a 72-hour Israel-Hamas ceasefire went into effect on Tuesday in Gaza. The World Bank promises $200 million emergency funding to fight Ebola virus. And President Park Geun-hye vows to carry out a stern investigation and punish those responsible for a young soldier who was bullied to death. Hello and welcome to ARIRANG News. Live from Seoul, I'm Kang Chae-ri. Korea's army and police chiefs stepped down on this Tuesday, taking responsibility for their failure to deal with a series of catastrophes that rocked the country over the past few months. The Army Chief of Staff, General Kwon Oh-sung, offered to resign over the death of a 23-year-old conscript who was bullied to death. And the National Police Commissioner, Lee Sung-han, also resigned for his agency's delay in identifying the body of Yoo Byung-eun, the fugitive owner of the Seoul-ho ferry operator. And staying with the case of a young soldier who was bullied to death, the Korean government plans to expand this investigation into the killing of this army conscript who died after being struck in the chest by his senior soldiers. Yoo Rian has more.
Speaking about the 23-year-old young soldier who was bullied to death back in April, President Park Geun-hye vowed a thorough investigation and punishment for those found responsible. The comments came during a cabinet meeting Tuesday morning, a day after Defense Minister Han Min-gu apologized to the nation over the failure to prevent such an incident from occurring.
It's a military commander's basic responsibility to send enlisted men back to their parents safe and sound. We feel a great burden over this incident.
The 23-year-old Yoon was bullied severely by his comrades back in April when he was forced to hold a horse-riding stance until the early hours of the morning and told to lick spit off the ground. He choked to death after being hit in the chest by 5 of his comrades. The army announced it will consider pressing murder charges against the 5 soldiers if found responsible for the young soldier's death. It's the latest in a series of similar incidents in recent months, and public distrust in the military is growing. An army sergeant who had been bullied by his comrades went on a shooting rampage back in June, killing 5.
When my son goes to the army, I'm going to check his body whenever I visit to see if he has been physically abused. I'm worried he may have to go through the same thing and be forced to hide it.
Harsh military practices and a distorted rank-based culture which seniors can use to abuse junior enlisted soldiers has long been prevalent in the military. To maintain a strong defense against North Korea, all South Korean men are mandated to serve in the military. But the recurrence of abuse-led deaths has the nation deeply worried about the safety of their sons. Yoo Rian, ARIRANG News.
The Ebola virus is rapidly spreading in West Africa. Cases detected in this region since earlier this year have topped 1,600, with the death toll nearing 900 now. And now the World Bank is stepping in to help curb this deadly outbreak with a pledge of $200 million. Kim Min-ji reports.
The World Bank has pledged a $200 million emergency fund to help contain the Ebola outbreak in West Africa. World Bank President Jim Yong Kim said the fund would provide support to stop further transmission of Ebola within the 3 affected nations and prevent infections in neighboring countries. The emergency fund will be used to pay for medical supplies and salaries for medical staff and also help communities cope with financial hardships caused by the epidemic. Others are also reaching out. The African Development Bank has set aside $60 million for support and the World Health Organization $100 million. The Ebola outbreak has claimed at least 887 lives since the first case in Guinea in February, and Nigeria has now reported its 2nd case of the disease. However, raising hopes that there may be a cure, 2 American missionary workers infected with the virus are reportedly recovering after receiving an experimental drug called ZMapp. Health officials say Dr. Ken Bradley and Nancy Wright-Bull began showing signs of improvement within a couple of hours. Although the serum hasn't been tested in humans before, monkeys have survived the virus when given the serum within 48 hours of infection. Meanwhile, the U.S. Centers for Disease Control and Prevention said it will dispatch 50 staff to the affected regions within this month to fight the deadly virus. Kim Min-ji, ARIRANG News.
Now, what is this deadly virus that's affected so many West African countries? For more on what the virus is really like and why it's spreading so fast in that region, here is our Shin Se-min.
It will be extremely difficult at first to detect whether someone has been infected because Ebola symptoms are similar to the common cold in the beginning. But within just days, the patient will begin to experience chronic abdominal pain, bleeding eyes, vomiting, and diarrhea, along with deadly organ failure, eventually resulting in death within a couple of weeks. So how is the virus transmitted? Through direct contact with the bodily fluids of an infected person. This includes blood, sweat, saliva, or other body fluids, making transmission through casual contact in a public setting unlikely. But as I said earlier, because it's difficult to detect the virus in the early stages, there is an increased risk of transmission. Ebola can kill up to 90% of those infected, although in the current outbreak, the death rate stands at around 55%. And this latest outbreak that was first detected in Guinea in February is spreading fast and has since expanded to Sierra Leone, Liberia, and even in Nigeria. West African states especially lack the resources to fight Ebola, and cultural factors are also making it difficult to put the brakes on its spread. So what can we do to avoid coming in contact with this deadly virus? And just like any other stories like this, be sure to wash your hands regularly and be aware of people with flu-like symptoms. Shin Se-min, ARIRANG News.
And in other news, another monument dedicated to women forced into sexual slavery in the early 20th century has been unveiled, this time in New Jersey. 2 Korean former sex slaves currently touring the United States were also part of this special event. Kwon So-ah reports.
This iron butterfly has been established to remember the hundreds of thousands of women who were forced into sexual slavery before and during the Second World War by the Japanese military. Honoring the so-called comfort women from Korea, China, Taiwan, the Philippines, the Netherlands, and Indonesia, the monument was unveiled at Liberty Plaza in Union City, New Jersey on Monday. It is the 7th such monument in the United States honoring the sexual slavery victims, but this one is a bit different in that it's the first time a local government took the initiative in creating it. Korean communities had taken the lead in other projects throughout the U.S.
This is about human rights and it's about education, educating our youth about what took place in the past so we don't make the same mistakes again.
2 surviving Korean comfort women took part in the emotional ceremony that welcomed some 400 people.
We thank the American and Korean people who have come here, and although we don't have much time left, we will live the rest of our lives with strength.
Lee Ok-sun and Kang Il-chul also met with representatives of the White House and State Department during their trip in the U.S., but no details of their talks have been released. Meanwhile, in Los Angeles, the California District Court rejected a request from a group of Japanese Americans who want a memorial statue that was put up last year outside of Glendale City Hall removed. Kwon So-ah, ARIRANG News.
For the past 10 years, Japan's white paper has claimed sovereignty over Korea-controlled Dokdo Island in the East Sea, and this year is no different. The latest was submitted by its defense ministry to the cabinet on Tuesday, indicating the island as its territory. The Korean government was quick to respond. Seoul said it cannot accept Japan's actions and urged Tokyo to withdraw the claims and refrain from such activities in the future, saying such moves will not help improve bilateral ties. It added Korea's sovereignty over the island can be proven historically, geographically, and internationally. Spending at the
for the latest in news that impacts Korea and the world. Join Kang Chae-ri for a lively half hour that covers politics, business, international news, and much more. Live at 8, every weeknight on ARIRANG TV.
Human Rights Council headquarters in Geneva on Thursday, finding ways to persuade. Following last month's by-election defeat, Korea's main opposition party has been left without a leader and is not likely to have one until next year's party convention. So for the time being, interim leader Park Geun-hye is at the helm, and she is promising to break away from the party's past. Kim Young-gil reports.
Park Geun-hye, who is serving as both the full leader of the main opposition New Politics Alliance for Democracy and the interim chief of its emergency committee, has been tasked with rebuilding and reforming the party. The committee will carry out a set of reforms until a new leadership is selected early next year.
Our party will select members for the emergency committee from both inside and out of the party. The public can also make recommendations through Twitter, Facebook, or our party's website.
The committee will function as the main opposition's executive branch until a party convention next year, sometime before March. There, officials will pick the party's new chairman, secretary general, and other senior executives. In her new role, Park, a three-term lawmaker, is faced with the arduous task of finding a way to unify different factions within the party and forging a new path.
The future of the New Politics Alliance for Democracy depends on how well we extricate ourselves from old customs and old politics.
The pro-Nomuyon arm once held the lion's share of power, but was weakened following the defeat of former presidential hopeful Moon Jae-in, a key pro-No figure, in the 2012 presidential election. Pundits say that the pro-No faction is now likely to make a comeback. The main opposition party has been in a state of turmoil since its defeat in last week's parliamentary by-elections. The party won just 4 of the 15 parliamentary seats up for grabs, prompting party co-leaders Kim Han-gil and An Chol-soo to step down to take responsibility. Kim Young-gil, ARIRANG News.
In less than 10 days from now, Pope Francis will be in Korea for a 5-day visit that will mark his very first trip to Asia. He'll be running on a very tight schedule, making his rounds across the country, meeting with many people, including the victims and bereaved families of the April ferry disaster. Park Ji-won has the details.
The preparatory committee for the visitation of the Holy Father said Tuesday that Pope Francis will meet victims of the Seoul ferry disaster, including surviving students from Danwon High School, during his 5-day visit to Korea. The committee also said it invited North Korean Catholic faithfuls to the Mass for Peace and Reconciliation, which will be held on the last day of the Pope's visit. However, North Korea responded it would be difficult for them to attend the event. The 77-year-old Pope will have a very tight schedule during his cross-country tour, which is his first visit to Asia since his inauguration as pontiff in February 2013. Upon his arrival on Thursday, August 14th, the Pope will hold a meeting with President Park Geun-hye, followed by another with Korean bishops. And on the following day, he will take part in a celebratory mass for the solemnity of the Annunciation in Daejeon, located in Korea's central region. He will have a luncheon with around 20 youth representatives from 17 Asian countries who will be in Korea for the 6th Asian Youth Day celebrations. On the 3rd day of this trip, Pope Francis will celebrate the beatification mass of 124 Korean martyrs who lost their lives mostly during the 19th century under severe religious persecution. He will later meet the disabled in a rehabilitation center called Dokdo. On the 4th day, on August 17th, the pontiff will meet with the Asian bishops in Hemi, nation's southwest region, followed by a concluding mass for the 6th Asian Youth Day. On his final day, Pope Francis will celebrate Mass for peace and reconciliation in the Myeongdong Cathedral in Seoul, inviting nearly 1,000 people, including former wartime sex slaves during Japan's colonial rule in early 20th century. With Catholics making up around 10% of the Korean population, this visit marks an important milestone, which marks the first trip by a pope to the nation in 25 years, following Pope John Paul II's 2 visits to Korea in 1984 and 1989. Park Geun-hye, ARIRANG News.
The world's largest smartphone maker, Samsung Electronics, is losing ground to local manufacturers in 2 of the world's biggest developing economies. U.S.-based market researcher Canalys says China-based Xiaomi sold around 15 million units domestically during the second quarter of this year, good enough for 14% of the Chinese market and 2 percentage points higher than Samsung's mark. It's a similar story in India, where local manufacturer Micromax has a leg up on Samsung by the same margin. This according to Hong Kong-based researcher Counterpoint. Kakao, which dominates Korea's messenger application market, is aiming to expand into various businesses, from e-commerce to a mobile call taxi service. This move comes as the company searches for its next growth engine. Hwang Jie tells us more.
With its nationwide user base, Korea's largest mobile messenger app, Kakao, is striving to break into new businesses. In order to provide an online credit card payment service starting next month, Kakao has already reached partnerships with 9 credit card companies, including Shinhan Card and KB Kookmin Card. The service will allow users to make easier payments when they purchase goods on online shopping malls, just like PayPal. It's not the only e-commerce business that Kakao is trying to dive into. Another service dubbed Bank Wallet Kakao will allow users to transfer up to almost $100 a day to other Kakao users. The service is set to be introduced in September in conjunction with 15 local commercial banks. Kakao is also pondering whether to enter the call taxi service market. The service will assign the nearest taxis to users and also let them pay their fare with its e-wallet service. Experts say the plans show Kakao's aspiration to grow as an information and lifestyle service platform. It also points to Kakao's efforts to diversify its profits. Currently, Kakao's sales are heavily dependent on its Kakao game service that combines online mobile gaming with its free instant messaging app. Almost 80% of the company's sales came from the service last year. Hwang Jie, ARIRANG News.
The latest humanitarian ceasefire between Israel and the Palestinian militant group Hamas has gone into effect following intense global pressure to end this conflict. For more, Paul is joining us from the news center. Paul, we've seen several of these ceasefires come and go, with both sides accusing the other of breaking them. The question is, will it hold this time around?
Well, many observers are hoping so, and going so far as to say this may be the breakthrough that will lead to a longer-term peace. The 3-day humanitarian truce proposed by Egypt started on Tuesday, 8 a.m. local time. Since then, Israel's military says it has pulled out all ground troops from the Gaza Strip, with an Israeli delegation set to arrive in Cairo for talks with their Palestinian counterparts. Our Connie Lee has more.
It's a 3-day ceasefire on the Gaza Strip starting Tuesday. After nearly a month of fighting and multiple broken truces, Israel and Palestinian groups, including Hamas and Islamic Jihad, have agreed to a 72-hour ceasefire proposed by Egypt.
Hamas informed the Egyptians that it agrees to the 72-hour truce. The Israeli occupation forces should withdraw outside the border.
With previous truces falling through, often within a matter of hours, there's understandable concern about whether this one will last.
Israel will honor the ceasefire, as agreed to, and negotiated through the Egyptians. We'll be watching Hamas very closely. If Hamas violates this ceasefire, so Israel is prepared to respond.
To negotiate a longer-term deal, Israel and Palestinian groups also agreed to attend talks in Cairo with Egyptian mediators. The ceasefire deal comes after Israel's declaration of a 7-hour pause in the fighting on Monday. However, Palestinians accused Israel of breaking its own truce. Gaza's health ministry says Israel fired missiles at a house in a refugee camp in northern Gaza, killing at least 3 people, including an 80-year-old child. Israel says several rockets were fired from Gaza during that truce.
This operation is really taxing my soul. It's making me lose my humanity. I consider myself a liberal, but it's hard to stay very liberal when people are raining rockets on you every day.
More than 1,800 people, overwhelmingly Palestinian civilians, have been killed and nearly 2 million people displaced since the fighting started 4 weeks ago. Connie Lee, ARIRANG News.
And rescue teams in Bangladesh are struggling to launch a search operation for a ferry that capsized on Monday, leaving hundreds of passengers trapped inside. Certainly reminds us of this April ferry disaster in Korea. Paul, what kind of obstacles are rescuers there facing?
Well, rescue teams say they're facing high waves and strong currents in the search for the ferry, with speedboats and salvage vessels being forced to turn back from the disaster site. It's still unclear how many people were aboard the MV Panak, but authorities estimate there were up to 300 passengers. The Navy has started using sonar equipment to pinpoint the ferry, which capsized a day ago in waters 30 kilometers southwest of Bangladesh's capital of Dhaka. About 100 people have reportedly been rescued, while 2 women died after being taken to hospital.
A strong wind hit our ferry, and instantly a huge wave came through the windows and water got into the lower part of the ferry. The passengers became very scared and rushed to the other side of the ferry, and then the ferry tilted and sank. There were 5 members in our family. Only I and 1 other brother survived as we jumped into the water.
It's still not clear what caused the accident, but local police say the ferry was overloaded with passengers and was traveling in rough conditions. Both accidents are unfortunately not uncommon in Bangladesh's river network. In March 2012, a ferry sank near the same spot, killing at least 145 people.
Now, moving on, with the hosting of a pretty successful World Cup on their backs, Brazil has begun the countdown to the 2016 Olympics to be held in Rio de Janeiro. And Brazil has got plenty of criticism, I would say, from the International Olympic Committee this past year, but it looks like they're getting their act together.
It appears so, Cherry. IOC Vice President John Coates, who as recently as April had described Brazil's Olympic preparations as the worst ever seen, has changed his tone, saying things are now much, much better. He was speaking at an event marking the 2 years until the start of the Summer Games in Rio. Interim reports from the committee have given passing grades on the progress on infrastructure development, as well as addressing concerns of water pollution. Coates added that Brazil's relatively smooth hosting of the World Cup in June and July had been reassuring.
Over the last 2 months, they've really put their foot to the pedal, and the contracts for the Diadora area that had concerned us most have all been let. There is construction happening at a significant pace, and we've got our Games Director there at the moment watching the test events and for other work. We've got permanent people there, the IOC.
Preparations for the first Olympics on the South American continent, however, have been suffering from numerous delays and rising costs. Poor communication between different levels of the Brazilian government and organizers has also prompted criticism from international sports federations.
Now, turning now to Russia, Paul, where government officials are scrambling to bring back thousands of its citizens who have been stranded abroad, actually, after a Russian travel agency left them high and dry. Fill us in on the details.
Well, the Russian-based tourism firm Labyrinth announced on Saturday that it was halting all operations, leaving some 27,000 overseas travelers without return tickets, and customers claiming that even their hotel reservations were revoked without a refund. The company blamed the closure on the negative political and economic situation, marking the 4th Russian tour operator to go bust over the past month. Tourism officials in Moscow said on Monday that it was still assisting around 16,000 Russians trapped abroad after making emergency arrangements. Russian Prime Minister Dmitry Medvedev lashed out at tour agencies, branding them as pyramid schemes and ordering authorities to closely monitor their finances. This as EU and U.S. sanctions over the Ukraine crisis are threatening to tip the Russian economy into a recession, with economic growth declining 11% since last September. Chetty?
All right, Paul, thank you very much. Always good to have you with us, and we'll see you back here in just about 2 hours.
Good evening, I'm Michelle Park here with the latest weather forecast. Now, conditions are currently overcast nationwide. However, the heat remains stifling and constant, leading to a heat wave alert for the areas in Gangwon-do province. And today's cloudy skies and high temperatures will continue as similar conditions are expected for tomorrow. But there's also some rain in the forecast for the central region and the southern regions from the morning throughout the late afternoon. Now, meanwhile, Typhoon Halong is expected to pass near Okinawa, Japan on Friday before tracking west, affecting the southern regions of Korea by this weekend. Now, going over to our temperature readings. Seoul will start off the Wednesday morning at 24 and 29 in the afternoon. Meanwhile, the southern cities such as Daegu and Busan will top out at 33 and 30 degrees. Now moving over to other regions, Jeju Island tops over to 30, while Dokdo and Mankungang both top to 28. Well, that's all for now. I'm Michelle Park, and have a wonderful evening.
Thank you, Michelle, and that will do it for this edition of ARIRANG News. Thanks for watching.